Hello and welcome to the second video in the Expired Film Project film series, where I'll be shooting 28 rolls of expired medium format 120 film and documenting every roll. In this video I'll be shooting some slide film, some Fujifilm Velvia 50. Now if I'd known at the time when I took this film, when I shot it, how temperamental slide film is, I probably would have found it a more daunting experience than I did. However, I was relatively unaware of this at the time, probably should have done more research. But anyway, luckily it came out pretty much okay in the end. So from my research, I've heard that you're supposed to expose expired film, as a rule of thumb, one stop over box speed. So I did this with slide film. However, after finishing the roll and speaking to someone working in a film lab, he actually told me that when it comes to slide film, he would recommend to shoot it at box speed. So, in spite of this, most of the images came out okay, luckily, and were able to be saved in the edit, even though some of them were a bit overexposed in their negative or positive form, that is. So, being such a slow speed film, I needed a bright sunny day to shoot it on. Here in the UK, being relatively grey for a lot of the year, I had to wait a couple of days, but eventually when that day presented itself, I got in my car, drove up the road to a local nature reserve here, and shot the film. Like with the previous roll, I used my Certix Prontor old 1930s German 6x9 medium format camera that produces some whopping great negatives, and it's really quite powerful to hold one of these positives in your hand, because it's this massive image that's been produced that, I mean, ultimately when you're enlarging it, you're not really enlarging it all that much larger than what it already is, and it's just kind of cool holding such a massive negative in your hand, or positive, I mean. Whatever. Without further ado, let's take a look at the images. Starting with the one I'm most pleased with, this one came out relatively okay. I mean, off the bat, there are some limitations with this camera. I was shooting at a relatively open aperture, producing that vignetting effect at the top and bottom, but you know, there's not much to do about that when it comes to this camera, and I kind of like the effect anyway. I think I metered for the mid-tones and then overexposed by a stop, so you know, there's a little bit of shadow detail. I think I got rid of some of it in the edit actually, because it was a tiny bit overexposed from what I'd like. I think I focused at some point in the mid-ground, so it gave sort of a cool shallow depth of field effect with the foreground being a little bit blurry, which again I like. This being a viewfinder camera essentially, where you focus using hyperfocal distance by literally adjusting the lens according to its distance markings with regards to the subject that you want in focus. This isn't the most precise camera, which is kind of the fun of it, and I kind of enjoy that. So anyway, not all of these images are perfectly in focus, but that's just the fun of the game. The second shot, again, I'm relatively pleased with. This one was pretty overexposed, so pretty much able to save it in the edit. I mean, the colors are great in Velvia. I mean, I can see why landscape photographers love it so much. A bit of a funky focus on this one. I mean, the top of that pole with the compass on top. Yeah, it's a little bit blurry, but you know, can't be perfect, can't be too picky with this old camera. So yeah, you know, I'm relatively happy with this one too. I mean, they take ridiculously long to compose, not because I'm spending tons of time meticulously crafting my composition, but more because just to get a simple idea of what your composition is going to be takes time. And I've actually downloaded an app in my phone now that allows me to simulate the image I'll get by putting in the frame size and the focal length of my lens and getting a rough idea of what I'm going to get. So, you know, there are ways around it, but it takes time. But hey, that's what you get for using this camera. Moving on to the next image. This one was the trickiest one to meter because of the really quite dark shadows in the foreground and the very bright background. I wasn't using any filters for this. I mean, goodness knows if I can get any filters for this old camera anymore. So yeah, this I think I metered for the shadows and then didn't overexpose by a stop, or underexposed by half a stop. I can't remember. I thought that would equate to roughly metering for the midtones and overexposing. I wasn't as concise in record keeping for this roll as I was for the previous, so I can't actually remember. But again, overall, it's not perfect, there's the vignetting, but I'm relatively happy with it, again, so that's good. The next image, which I think was actually the first image I took on this roll, they're not necessarily in chronological order. Again, relatively happy with it, happy with the exposure. Yeah, the colors are cool. I mean, it's pretty sharp because it's such big negative, positive. So yeah, not much to say here again. Pretty happy with it. This last image is basically the same as the first image, just in the landscape form. Not much to say here. I think I exposed it with the same settings. Actually, maybe not, because the foreground is a little bit sharper than in the previous shot. I can't decide which one I like best. Probably the former. Anyway, relatively happy with this shot again. So, to wrap up, relatively successful roll, this one. It was a fun first time experience using slide film. And I will probably be more careful next time. However, I got off mostly scot-free. Link to the respective blog post to this video in the video description. I'm writing a series of blog posts to accompany these videos, so essentially if you want a text-based version of this video as well as slightly better images, possibly clearer, go check out the link in the description to the blog. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and the next video will be up relatively soon.